Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody here, and at least one person on Zoom at this point. Thank you for coming. So today you're at the Tools for Academic Success series, which is run through the Center for Student Engagement and Success. My name is Kristen Seitz. I'm Associate Director of Learning and Success here at the Mount, and I coordinate this series. I know I've seen some of you before, some are new to me, but welcome. We also have here in the back with us one of our peer leaders, Maria. So feel free to ask either one of us for questions about CSES or the TOF series or anything in general. This series does happen every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. So feel free to come back any future Tuesday. The series schedule Maria had in the back, so if you didn't get one, feel free to grab one. We also have the planners in case anybody would like a planner, you're welcome to that as well. So every week you can come in, we have different presenters from all over campus, lots of different faculty and administrators from different departments who have expertise in certain areas. Have them come in and give you lots of helpful information that will hopefully help you on your journey here at the Mount. So please continue to come in future weeks. We have, I know next week we have Dr. Christina Green from the business department coming to present on goal setting. So that might be something some of you are interested in coming to next week as well. We also do raffles. So every time you come, you get entered in a raffle for our monthly prize drawings. Today is actually the 4th session. So we are going to, at the end of today, if you want to hang around for a minute, do raffles. I've got 2 Mount prizes. I've got a nice little t-shirt and a hat here. So I'm going to pull a random number of all the people who have attended the first 4 sessions. So if your name gets pulled, you win a prize. That's how it works. We do this so every month, pretty much every 4th session, I'll do a drawing, and I do, usually 2 prizes each month. We'll also have a grand prize drawing at the end of the semester, usually a little bit nicer, more expensive stuff at the end. So every time you come, you get an entry. So you're earning. So if you've been to all 4 sessions so far, you get 4 entries in today's drawing. So more times you come, the more chances you get to win. Now, that said, if you can't make it to a presentation and you would like to just watch it later, feel free. We do record these and we post them onto the CSES website. So feel free to go check out any of our past sessions if you want. And I think that's about enough of my intro for today. So we have today with us the man you've probably come to listen to. So this is Dr. Peter Dorsey, who's the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. And he's here to talk about preventing plagiarism. So I will let him take it away.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Sure.
And thanks to all of you for coming. It's great to see you, and I hope this semester is off to a great start. I do have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen. Today, my topic today is not really a very fun topic. It's about, it's really about academic misconduct, which is plagiarism is probably, as you'll see, the most, let's say, most popular, it's sort of the most frequent type of academic misconduct that we see in the College of Liberal Arts. So it is my job, when we have cases of academic misconduct and plagiarism within the College of Liberal Arts, it's my job to handle that particular case. So usually what happens is a professor, the term I like to use is evidence. So the professor sees evidence, that possibly, something that shouldn't have happened has happened. And so the professor sort of collects that evidence, passes it on to me, and then I try to look at the evidence and make some kind of a judgment about it. And then there's an appeals process if you disagree with what the dean says. Then of course you have an opportunity to appeal. So I'm doing this a little bit from my point of view, right? Because my point of view is the point of view of sort of seeing the cases and what they look like. So and that's kind of part of what I'm going to be talking about. I also, there are some, let's say, beliefs, misconceptions maybe about what constitutes plagiarism or what constitutes a type of academic misconduct. And I think students are kind of operating on those beliefs, and then all of a sudden maybe they get into trouble. So, one thing I like to sort of start with is sort of what's supposed to happen, right? When you finish college, when you've got 4 years of work hard to study, and really at the beginning, it's a process of transformation. right? So you are able to see the world and you have certain skills that you didn't really have to that level when you started. I'll use two very quick examples, and they're really kind of reading examples. So what is I remember I think my senior year of high school, a friend of mine comes up to me in class and he says like, look at this poem. Can you tell me what this poem is about? And so I looked at the poem. I thought I was a pretty good reader, right? So he's coming to me, as a reader, and we kind of looked at the poem, and I came up with some kind of a theory on what the poem was about. He said, no, that's completely wrong. My professor, or my teacher said it was about this, right? Now, what I'd like to think about, like, what kind of transformation occurs in college is that by the time I graduated from college, I think I probably would have been able to give a much better answer to that question. Now, on a more mundane level, I'll never forget, when I started college, I had a political science course. And the political science course, they had a book of essays written by other scholars, right? Other, political science professors. And I remember being assigned to read some of these essays, and I had my book and I read it. And you may have had this experience. When I got to the end, right, I had no idea what I had just read. But my eyes had gone over the words, but I had no idea what they meant, right? It was very difficult. So again, like the idea of when you finish college, and I think that, I would have said the same thing, probably by the time I finished college, I probably would have understood those essays at least a lot better. Now, so how do you get from point A to point B? Well, it doesn't happen overnight, right? There's not like a book that you can read of like how to read a sophisticated political science paper, in 24 hours or something like that. So, it's really kind of this gradual accumulation of skills, reading skills, then I would also add writing skills. That's kind of the goal. And I want you to think about these cases of plagiarism with that goal in mind. Now, another kind of experience that I think about this is my family, and this is my dad right here. We went to my sons are twins, and we went to their college. They went to St. Joe's in Philly. And, a few years back, they graduated, but a few years back, we went family weekend, which was just a weekend time, right? And there was a quizzo game, like a trivia game, and your family or your whoever you were with, they could kind of work as a team and answer these trivia questions, and then, they had several rounds of these questions. And then at the end, of course, the team that got the most answers right won, right? So, what happened, my dad, I know, was pretty upset. But what happened is kind of people started out without looking at their phones for the answers, right? But by the end of the game, pretty much everyone except maybe our table and maybe one other table were just looking up all the trivia questions on their phones, right? So the game didn't become like how much trivial knowledge you have. The game became like how quick are you with your phone to Google answers to these questions. So no big deal, right? And it was just all in fun anyway. So, but what if the education at the Mount was like that quizzo game, right? Rather than kind of reading, carefully thinking about ideas, and learning to polish and develop your writing skills. It's just sort of about handing in a paper that gets an okay grade, right? So you don't really need to learn how to become a better writer. You just need to learn how to gather material and present it as if it was your own. What would happen to our education as about? Would that transformation that I talked about earlier, would that really happen? And I'm thinking, not to the same extent, right? So that, that's kind of why, right, the Mount has an academic integrity policy. So, and this is really, kind of what I'm going to be talking about is our academic integrity policy. So it's good to know where to find it, right? So it's in our catalog. Now we no longer have a paper catalog. We have an electronic catalog. It's available through our website. And this is kind of to tell you how to get to it. It's not hard to get to it. You can go to the main page, click on the little magnifying glass, And then once you click on that, you'll get a series of things, and one of them will say catalog. Right? So you kind of click on the catalog. Now you can either search in there, or you can just, there's a sub-menu which says academic policies and regulations. And then, of course, you click on that, and then you have two, right? So you have main campus academic policies and regulations. Yeah, that's for campus. And then we have also our Frederick campus. So obviously, for you guys, I think most of you are going to click on the main campus. And then you get another series, right? And that says Mount St. Mary's University Standards of Academic Integrity. And so that is where you will find basically what I'm going to be talking about over the next few minutes. Now, of course, I think if you got into the Mount page and you searched, and you just searched for Mount, I would say standards of academic integrity, you might be able to get to this a little bit more directly. So basically, if you read this in our catalog, there's 5 types of academic misconduct: cheating, plagiarism, unauthorized providing or receiving assistance, doing unauthorized work for another person, which is kind of similar to the previous one, and then attempting to influence academic evaluation by means other than academic achievement. So these are our 5 types. Now the definitions in the catalog are much longer. So I'm just trying to make them a little bit easier to read on a PowerPoint. Now, which of these do you think is our least big problem? Which one of these do we not really have to worry about that much?
Well, that's better, but are you comfortable?
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Which one of these do you think is the least worry? Yes. No, that's actually a pretty big problem, doing unauthorized work for another person, and I'll tell you why in a second. No, that's the biggest problem. That's the number 1. It's the last one, right? So I don't know what would that be? Attempting to influence academic evaluation by means other than academic achievement. Does anyone have an idea of an example of that? Yeah, like bringing your teacher cookies so the teacher will grade your essay very easily. So, we don't really have too many problems with that one. So, which is, fewer cookies, but I guess it's good. So what I want to do is, this is where I'm talking about, like, kind of myths, right? So we have myths about academic misconduct, and then we have myths about plagiarism, and I'm going to try to approach it that way, like whether someone knows. So I think one big myth is I won't get caught, right? I'm not going to get caught, right? So here are the statistics. We have kind of a growing problem. Now this is just me, like this is just the College of Liberal Arts. This is not School of Science, School of Business, right? This is just College of Liberal Arts. You can see we went from 60 in 2016 to 2017, and we've gone up steadily. And then last year we had 135, which was the most ever in my school. So I mean, on one level, I'm saying people are getting caught, right? So I guess that's number 1 lesson is just please be careful, right? This is not like sort of, I don't know, something that can get you in trouble. It's not fun, right? I don't think anyone likes it. So another myth is if I did it in high school, it's okay to do college, right? And students come in and they talk to me after I charge them, or if they want to talk to me, when I'm gathering my evidence, and one of the things that they say to me is like, "Oh, I did this in high school and it was fine." Right? This is how I wrote my papers in high school. Question?
Actually, I don't want to came out of high school. I thought of the plagiarized one because I didn't know
Right. Right, and I'm going to talk a little bit about intentionality. Is kind of a great topic. In fact, that's one of my myths on plagiarism. Not that they didn't. I think they didn't intend, but you still kind of get it. So anyway, and I think unfortunately, we're developing these habits in high school, and sort of, we're not getting questioned by our teachers in high school, and so when we get to college, we're kind of expecting, pretty much the same thing. But here the professors, they're not going to know what you did or didn't do in high school, right? They're following this policy that you have, right? So, and they're probably not even going to care too much about what you did or didn't do in high school. They have their standards and their understanding, and so that's what they're going to want. Okay. Now another myth, and this is coming to be a bigger problem. And I'll say sort of the most blatant form of it is just file sharing. Right? So originally, my number one problem was plagiarism. People were going to, let's say, plagiarism from the internet. Right? People were going to the internet. They were copying and pasting from the internet. They were putting that copy material into their papers. And that was what I saw most often. Now what I'm finding is students are actually sharing their papers with each other. Right? So I saw Brave New World, right, which I've taught in symposium numerous times. Right, so hey, I'm on the soccer team, and I've become very good friends with a sophomore, and that sophomore wrote a paper about Brave New World last season, last year, and so hey, I'm working on my paper. Do you have any ideas? Well, let me send you my paper, right? And so what we're getting is. Now, here's the thing, here's the tricky thing about that, is that sophomore has no idea what the student who gets that paper is going to do. That student could just really be looking for ideas, read the paper, get some ideas, and then go off and write her own paper, no problem, right? But that sophomore doesn't know that another student can take that paper, change the name, change a few words, and submit it, right? And so, maybe one of the myths is, well, that sophomore's not going to get in any trouble because I did the work. But according to our policy, both students are going to get charged, right? Both are going to get charged, right? And here's what the policy says: a student who commits another copy from his or her own paper, examination, or project shall be held as accountable as the student who submits the copy material. Students are expected to safeguard their work and should not share papers, projects, homework, or exam answers with other students unless specifically directed to by their professors. So you've got to be this is where you have to be super careful. You want to be generous, you want to be helpful, right? You've got a friend who's working on a deadline, got a tough paper, you want to help, but please do not share previous work electronically, because once you share it, you have no idea what that's doing. Right? So, and so you could be charged because, it's the same thing when you're taking a testing class, right? You got one student here, you got one student here. This student can't show that test to the other person, right? So in the same way, you shouldn't be sharing your previous work with other students.
That's something that I've got the most charged with my students.
Yeah, and this is the thing that's happening more and more, right? It used to be just copies from the internet, now it's... you guys probably know about Course Hero. So there are other sites. These are internet sites that share papers, right? So Course Hero is one. So Course Hero is not my hero, right? So because of that policy I just read to you, as I read it, their submission to Course Hero violates the policy, right? Because it's sharing the work without the instructor. Course Hero is a website, right, which has all kinds of papers from other students. So it's kind of like a deal, right? It's brilliant, right? It's a brilliant plan. So let's say you're doing a paper on Brave New World, right? And so you want to get another paper. You're not going to do this like you could, you're going to get another paper on Brave New World and submit part of it. So you can go to Course Hero and find a paper from Brave New World and download it. And what you have to do, right, in order to sort of pay for this other student's paper is you have to submit a paper of your own, right? So let's say you have a philosophy paper, you submit the philosophy paper, and then you can get the paper on. So now you have your paper on philosophy, and then you also got the paper that you're going to borrow. So But the whole idea behind Course Hero is that it's violates our policy because we're sharing work without the instructor's permission. Right? Now, if you have an instructor, there could be situations where professors want you to share the work, so I'm not going to deny that, but you always have to have the permission of the instructor in order to do it. Okay. Now, as students, if you did that and you put your paper of philosophy up on Course Hero, and then the students take that work and submit it or part of it, or you're plagiarizing on it, like that's also a violation for both, right? Because you're providing unauthorized assistance to that other student, right? And that's not allowed in a policy. Now, the other thing that's really scary about Course Hero, and I've experienced it, right? Is Course Hero is Googleable, right? So let's say you love Course Hero, you do all your papers with Course Hero, and every time you get a paper from Course Hero, right? You have to submit another paper of your own, right? So let's say I'm Peter Dorsey, I've submitted 10 papers to Course Hero, like people could, Peter Dorsey, Brave New World, it's Googleable, right? People are gonna see that you're doing a lot of work with Course Hero. Now, does that mean you're necessarily plagiarizing Course Hero? Not necessarily, but it does mean you're submitting work probably without the instructor. So it's kind of like, and I've had experiences where a student I really liked, right, or a student I know is very smart or hardworking, and for whatever reason, I happen to Google that student. Sometimes I'm just trying to figure out like what their major is or something like that, and on my Google I see, Course Hero. Oh, geez, Okay, now here's another myth, and this is somewhat of an interesting one, is I can always reuse one of my papers as long as I wrote it myself, right? So if I did a paper in high school on Brave New World, it would pay for me just to resubmit my high school paper to my symposium class. Well, now I'll be honest with you, that's not plagiarism, right? But it does violate our policy, right? Because our policy is you cannot submit the same work in two courses without the professor's permission, right? And that is defined as a form of cheating. So, and I get this a good bit. So I'm going to get maybe 10% of all the cases I see are students recycling their previous. Yes.
What if the student comes and gives 1%, but you don't decide?
I think you'd probably be all right there. Right? But here's the key. Without the instructor, the professor's permission. So, it does happen. Like, let's say you wrote a brilliant paper on Brave New World as a freshman, and then you're in a senior ethics class, and one of the issues or one of the ideas that you wrote about is something that you continue to be fascinated about and you continue to learn about. So you're going to take your little 4-page paper from the symposium and you really want to expand it, and turn it into like a big senior project. Well, there's actually nothing wrong with that, right? But you just have to be able to get the instructor's permission. Say, hey, this is what I did as a freshman. This is what I'd like to do with it now. Is this okay, right? And usually, in a situation like that, that's a freshman. And then you got nothing to do. But, if you're just recycling old work, technically, without the professor's permission, that's violating the policy. Okay. So anyway, we've already identified the biggest problem. The biggest problem is, which is known as plagiarism. So that's our biggest. Of all the 5, the one I see most often. Okay. So the MOUT has a definition for plagiarism. So it's kind of important to remember the definition. The representation of someone else's words or ideas as one's own. Right? So, like, if you're writing something and you're using someone else's words, or you're taking someone else's ideas, and you're putting them in a paper in such a way that your teacher is going to think those are your words, or those are your ideas, all by yourself, right? Then you're in the realm of plagiarism. So, now, the main way the MOUT, let's say, checks for plagiarism is this program called Turnitin.com. So Turnitin.com is just basically a plagiarism detection program, right? And it's really just a matching program. I mean, it's sort of like a more sophisticated version of Google, I guess. But you know, one thing I want you to kind of be aware, it's linked to Canvas. So now professors can turn it off in their course, their Canvas, but most of them will leave it on. So if you're submitting material to at least papers and larger assignments on your Canvas site, probably automatically going to be directed to turnitin.com and check. Now what plagiarism does is basically checks assignments, it's looking for matches, right? For two things. One is all of the internet, at least as much of the internet as it knows about, right? And then it's also checking it against any other paper previously submitted to Turnitin.com. Right? So it's like the internet, and then all the other papers on Turnitin.com, which is like at this point probably billions of papers, right? Or at least millions, hundreds of millions. You know, and it's that second one is like if someone from your sophomore who wrote your Breaking World paper, you know, it's that second one that's going to catch that, right? If you're doing Course Hero or, you know, cutting and pasting from Wikipedia, it's going to be the first. Now, Turnitin.com is not perfect, right? Because all it does is it identifies matches. It identifies sections of text that match. And there's plagiarism that can take place without perfect matching. So I'll show you a little. Question, yes?
Well, yeah, a problem is like, let's say, like, we have someone who, I don't know, say like, same thing.
Yes.
Because like, people have the same idea for what we're learning about. And Turnitin said, oh, it's plagiarism.
Well, Turnitin is not necessarily going to say it's plagiarism. They're going to show that these different types of knowledge. So that's kind of an interesting one. So, you know, and because I work with this, I know there is gray area. Right? So let's just say that like there are two sentences that are very close to each other, but they're not perfect matches. And the words that are matching are pretty common words, right? I'm going to probably look at that, and your professor probably look at that and say, I don't think that's a problem. They may not even, right? But let's just say it's a 100-word sentence, and 98 of the words are exactly the same. Okay, you know, and you know, it's funny. Like this is one of the great things about humans, right? Humans' use of language is amazingly sophisticated and nuanced and complex, right? So, you know, two students kind of even working on the same idea, you know, probably aren't going to be writing very many of the sentences that are exactly the same. It just doesn't happen. You know, and it's kind of shocking. There are sentences that you think, oh, someone else must have written it. But chances are they didn't, right? Because each person is putting their own distinctive stamp on it. Okay, but that's a great question, and there is gray area. Good question.
Because like I've seen it happen where like someone like once like 10-word sentence, like I feel like I could have wrote that sentence.
Yeah. So it's you know, you got to just look at the sentence, right? So a lot of times, if it's kind of very basic historical information, you know, like in the 1930s, the Great Depression hit Americans hard, right? So that's the kind of sentence, you know, that you probably would see very, very similar sentences. You know, we're in Brave New World, you know, the author Aldous Huxley, you know, examines technology, you know, from a critical point of view, right? Yeah, you know, you can see. But, you know, if it's something like, when Lenina goes here and says this to, you know, the savage, blah, 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 right? Yeah, I don't think that's too many people are going to have that exact type of. Okay, so we do have some myths about plagiarism. So the biggest myth is I can copy from websites as long as I change the words, right? So that's a common myth. Now, can you tell me why this is not true? You know, what's the problem with this myth? Yes.
Because you're copying that idea.
Yes. Yeah. So it's plagiarism is words or ideas. So let's just say you went in and you changed every single word, right? But you followed. I mean, I've seen papers like this, right? It's spark notes from beginning to end, right? But Turnitin.com's not touching any of it. Because the person was so good about changing the words, but like every single sentence
one after the other is exactly the same meaning, right? So they're taking the ideas, but they're changing the words. So it's still plagiarism. But that's probably the biggest myth. But even when you think about it, like just think about it from this standpoint. Like, if a person copied and pasted from Sparkles, and they changed half of the words, right? All, not counting the uhs and the uhs and the does, right? They changed half of them. You think, well, they worked pretty hard, right? But still, 50% of the words don't really belong to you, right? So that can't be right. There's another person who wrote this book. All right, the second thing, and this is the big one, I won't get charged if I didn't intend to play. Right, so then, yeah, you brought the intention issue up. So, I'd like to sort of finesse this, but like, yes, you will, right? You will, because it's so, plagiarism is not trying to get in, when professors and people like me, are examining these cases, we cannot get into the head of the person. We can know what they were intending. It's kind of impossible to do that. But it comes down to that basic definition. Is the student presenting the words and ideas of others as if they were their own? Right? That's the definition. Are you presenting these words and ideas as if they're your own when in fact they come from somewhere else? Right? That's really where we decided. Now, could you plagiarize unintentionally? Yes. You could be unintentional. And I can imagine scenarios where the unintentional plagiarism occurs. So like, let's say, someone's writing a paper about brave people, right? They're looking for ideas, so they're all over the internet. And they're cutting and pasting ideas, and they're putting it into their Word document to look at later, right? And then they're also writing down in that same document their own words of it. And they're at it for 3 hours, right? So by the end of that session, unless they were really careful, which I encourage you to be, right? They may not actually know which ideas they came up with during formative ideas. But then they might incorporate some of that material directly into their paper without intending to use anything that comes from the But did they in fact plagiarize it? Yes, because they were using the words and ideas of others and presenting them in the paper as if they were. So now there's an easy way to get around that, and what would that be? Well, it's not easy in situations like that. With that? Yeah, citations, right? Now you got to be careful, because if you're in that mindset of taking words and ideas, right, you're going to have to keep track where are these coming from, right? But if you cite words and the ideas, then you're not going to go through both things. So that's going to be great, right? It's more work, but it's also, yes.
Put it like this, second would be like, I think, especially this.
Yeah, so, again, there are gray areas. There are definitely gray areas. But the one thing that students don't realize is how few words together need to be put in quotations, right? So, like, if you're talking to, like, English professors talking to other English professors, we write papers too, right? It's like 2 or 3 words in a row. If those are not your words, you should put them in. Now, I'm not talking about and to and the, right? If you're talking about substantive words that appear, right, in one of the sources you're using, and you're only using 3 of them, they should be included.
That level words, like,
Yeah.
I ran into that.
Yeah.
But I cited it on the website.
You should also be putting it in quotes. Right, it's 2 keystrokes. It's no big deal, right? So the reason why I have this in quotes is because one of our previous provosts, this is about the intentionality, right? Plagiarism is like getting into a car accident. Most people who are driving around, they get into an accident, they didn't intend to hit another car. They didn't intend to, crash their fender against the curb, right? But, it's sort of like, hey, You got into an accident, you're responsible for the accident. Like, that's the way the insurance company, that's the way the legal system. It's, yeah, you're responsible. We know you didn't intend it. So I try to be like a little more neutral because car accidents are, to me, it's like getting a speeding. Right? A lot of times you go over the speed limit and you don't really intend to go over. Right? But you are in fact over the speed limit, right? So it's kind of like that with plagiarism. You might not have intended to plagiarize, but you kind of broke the rules. You went over the limit that now St. Mary's has set, so chances are you're going to get a ticket. Right? It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean your writing skills aren't just fine. It's none of that, but it's kind of like we sort of have these rules. It's kind of like the rules of the road, and so we have to implement our rules. Okay, so here's another myth. As long as I get a green box, I'll turn it into how my paper is all around. And I'll show you that if you're not familiar with turnitin. So this is a myth because actually the color of the box or the percentage of matching material in your paper really doesn't tell us anything about plagiarism. It doesn't tell us whether you're guilty of it or not. So I'll show you, and this is from one of my own classes, right? So this is what, now it looks a little different on Canvas, but this is basically the same information that the professor will see on Canvas. So you have papers, and these are the papers written by students. This was a modernity class, right? So we can do that. That's something. So we have a range, right? And that's often the way that it's lined up. So 13% match to 25% match. And now you can see the box has changed from green, which means good, right, to yellow, which means warning. And then if it's really, if you submitted your soccer teammates' paper, it's going to be red, right? It's going to show that. But really, now, why is that the case? So even a paper that has 22% matching could be fine. Now, what would that look like? Paper with 22% matches something found in another paper could be perfectly fine. Can you think of a scenario where that would be the case? Yeah, they have a lot of quotes usually, right? Or they have a bibliography whose sources other people's used a lot of, right? So, all the sources that they have are on paper about breaking the world. Other students across the country have also used it.
Not that you get it wrong, just make sure you know. It's like, it's taken correctly cited, and it's going to show up like that.
Correct.
Because that doesn't mean that you're cheating. It's the number of match, like the percentage match on a paper.
Yeah, see, that's all turned it into showing how much of this.
I'm trying to help, because I can tell you to know what you were saying.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Kristen. I totally appreciate it. I like give this so much every day, right? 135 cases last year. And I think the 135, by the way, I think that was an anomaly because of all the remote learning. Right? So, the temptation, right, to sort of submit work that's not your own, I think increased when people were no longer sitting. So anyway, yeah, so oftentimes, if you're quoting a book, you're quoting Brave New World, right? Other students have been quoting, over the course of the year, right? They quoted the entire book somewhere or other, right? So it's kind of common for quoted material, to appear as a match on turnitin.com, when in fact it's all that's showing is that other people quoted stuff that you quoted, right? So it's not really, or the bibliographies are often almost identical, right? Because of a certain citation style, that a lot of people are just using across the country, and a lot of students are using.
But it's only that people want to
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, the percentage doesn't mean you've done something wrong.
Right.
In fact, I tell students that when they're turning in a paper for me, if it's like too low, then they probably didn't quote enough. Like that's a concern.
Exactly.
That's a big
Exactly.
one.
Yeah. So I think you would expect, and that's why 22% is still showing up green, right? But what I want to say about the myth part is some professors will let you see this number or this box before you submit your paper. And so And so some students are kind of under the impression, like, well, all I need to do is get it on the green, right? So they're just they're not really going to change the plagiarism. They're just going to try to reduce the amount until they get to a green box. And then when I charge them with plagiarism, because like there's still like 8 sentences in a row that are exactly from smart notes, right? But they just, eliminating some other things, got the box in the green. I still say that. It's not about the color of the box. It's about, whether you're, again, using the words and ideas of others and presenting them as if they were others. So in this particular class, all of these papers were fine. Nobody plagiarized. It's true, this student here quoted the lot. They have long quotes. So yeah, no big deal about plagiarism. It's just, a lot of quoted. So they all did. So to avoid plagiarism, obviously you want to make sure the words of others, when you're having the words, you want to put them in quotation. And technically, it's, let's see, it's still big.
No, I know what's going on, it's fine.
Okay, 4th page. Yeah. So like 2 or 3 words, right? That's really the statement. I'm not talking about those kind of words, but substantial words, really. You have 2 or 3 of them in a row, and it's they're key to the meaning of your sentence. Please put them in. And then, of course, you still have to have your citation. Right? The quotation marks by themselves aren't really doing anything. So you have to have your citation. But even if you're using the ideas of others, the arguments, the sequencing of the paper, right? Even when you put them in your own words, you don't have to use the quotation marks, but you still have to have the citation. Like these words came from. Yeah. Now I know in symposium it's, they use the MLA method, but we're not really, in plagiarism, we're not really checking for the method of citation. We just want to make sure that there is citation and in places where it should be. So, and again, I've seen, almost the entire paper. It's following Spark Notes just line by line, sentence by sentence. But, it's not using that many of Spark Notes' own words. So, but the student thinks he or she is fine, but actually they're plagiarizing, right? Okay, now there is an exception, and this is important, right? An exception to when you don't need a citation. And that is when you're presenting common knowledge. Okay. So George Washington was the first president. Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States of America. Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, right? That's common knowledge, so you do not need a citation for stuff like that. If it's common knowledge, you're good. It's assumed that this knowledge is very common in the world, so citations would not be needed. So Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World. That would be common knowledge. You wouldn't need it. But Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, while eating coffee and tea in his basement den, right? That might not be common knowledge. So it might be. Okay, so here's the thing: when in doubt, cite. Right? Why wouldn't you cite? Because professors are going to realize, hey, you did extra work, you did some research. They're going to admire that you did that. Now, most professors aren't going to require research for every paper, especially those who are freshmen and first-year students. But but when you're in doubt, play it safe, right? Now, so I have theories. I spend my nights thinking about plagiarism. It is really wearing me down. Right? So I don't really think I can do it that much longer. Having to deal with it, yeah. Having to deal with it is just wearing me down. It's not what I wanted to become a teacher. Right. So, but anyway, I have these theories I developed. So how does it happen? So there's kind of like, I'm going to suggest a wrong way and a right way. So a wrong way might look, this is not in every case, right, but a wrong way might look something like this. It starts with a failure to read the book, to do the reading, or even to get the book. I have a lot of students, they don't get the book, right? Now I know books are expensive, right? And I know some people do not have the money to purchase books. ways of getting books, even if you don't have money. One of them is learning services, right? They can help you. And sometimes, you get it out of the library, or sometimes the professor will be willing to give you a personal copy, or sometimes a PDF is available on the internet or something, right? So, but please think about this, right? To me, trying to go to college without getting the books is like trying to surf without a surfboard, right? It's like trying to fish without a fishing pole, right? It's sort of it's a basic thing that you need to have in order to be successful. And so, when you think about how to spend your money or how to organize like finances, think about it. Like, to me, it's a tragedy when they give now secondaries at the beginning of every semester like $7,000 of theirs or their parents' hard-earned cash, and yet they don't spend that extra $500 to get the books that they need in order to be successful, right? That's not. I don't think that's a good way to sort of approach. So anyway, for a variety of reasons, students either don't do the reading or they don't even have the reading. And then, so then what do they have to do? They have to go to websites to figure out what's going on in the reading, right? And so when they have to begin to write their papers, they're kind of building their paper from the website text. Like, that's where, right, the sort of formation of the paper is starting. And then where does their creative energy go? Their creative energy actually, in a lot of cases, you may not believe, their creative energy actually goes into disguising the plagiarism, right? They know that this text is coming from somewhere else, and so they're spending a lot of their creative energy like trying to change the words or reorganize a little bit or put some of their own sentences in between, right? But they're spending a lot of energy doing that, okay? And that's, I don't think that's leading, right, to this transformation that I talked about. Now, here's another idea. But this is maybe not be true, but for everyone. But the right way is get a hold of the reading, however way you can. Right? Try to get a hold of the reading, and if you're unable to purchase the text, talk to someone, talk to your professor, go to learning service. All right. Then you've got your text, read out, underline, highlight, take notes, write in the margins, right? And keep in mind that you are probably going to have to write a paper about it. So there's two ways of reading Brave New World. Right? You can read Brave New World like, oh, this is a fun, interesting book. I wonder what's going to happen in the end. And that would be a pleasurable. Or you could read it like, I'm gonna read this book, but I know darn well I'm going to have to write a dang paper about it, right? So, kind of keep that in mind as you're reading and underline things, think about things, and try to put parts of it together, either on paper. And then once you read that, when you brainstorm and share ideas, and it's okay to talk to it with others, your classmates, right? That's okay. So I don't want to discourage that type of collaborative. Sharing the files is one thing, but sharing ideas is one thing, right? But here, the creative energy goes into not like trying to disguise the plagiarism, but creative energy goes into organizing your ideas and then. And that's where the transformation that I talked about it. That's some really cool stuff. Okay. Now, you probably are thinking, like, well, what's the big deal? Why is Dr. Dorsey so passionate about plagiarism? I don't really want to be, right? I really want to be the type of person who doesn't have to worry about it. But the reason why the mouth is so concerned about it is basically it short circuits the learning process. You think about someone, okay, you got one student over here, who spent several weeks reading Brave New World, and you have another person who never opened the book, right? The one student who's reading and thinking about it and taking notes and writing in the margins, like they're actually engaged in the learning process. The other person, not so much. The other thing is plagiarism means that students aren't practicing or developing the important skills that people want you to. Reading skills, writing skills, arguing skills, communicating skills. Right? If you're short-circuiting, then the whole system is not working the way it's supposed to. Now, there is an issue of fairness, right? Because some people taking the shortcuts and then some people doing the long work, right? That's not really fair. That's not really fair to the student who's doing all the extra hard work. I was thinking about this with like free throws, right? So,
you know, like our athletes, you know, our basketball players, you know, they practice their free throws. I mean, they can't say like, you know, hey, Mary, have you been practicing your free throws? And Mary says, well, yeah, I asked my roommate to go shoot them for me. You know what I mean? Like the roommate could go shoot the free throws, and 100 free throws would be shot, but that's not going to help Mary become a better free throw shooter. Right? So that's kind of how I look at this difficult process. There is a context, there's a kind of a larger context also to this that makes it a big deal, and that is like we're creating a culture, right? So if we have this kind of culture where it's okay to swap files, it's okay just to download, you know, information from the internet and present and plot them in your paper. If that's the culture that we live in, right, then the whole culture is damaged and diminished. Like now St. Mary's is no longer, you know, the great academic institution, you know, that it has always been. Right? So, and the problem is if a lot of students are seeing others doing it, right, then they're going to be much more likely to do it. So I listen to one of these Malcolm Gladwell books. In the New York subway, right? The New York subway they sort of did a study where they noticed that if our people are jumping over the turnstiles, it's much more likely that everyone else will jump over the turnstile. You know what I'm saying? So it becomes part of the culture, and I don't know whether we want that in terms of our degree. Okay, so now I'm going to get just kind of into the nuts and bolts part of it. I realize I'm almost an hour. I'm sorry about that. So, you know, we sort of have a tiered system. So, you know, as I mentioned, if a professor sees evidence, they're supposed to turn the evidence over to the dean. The dean looks things over, and if the dean determines that an academic misconduct has occurred, the dean is going to look at the offense. Right? So the first offense is 0 for the assignment. The second offense is failure for the course, right, the whole course. And then the third offense is student may be expelled from the university. Now, do we usually expel people on the third offense? Probably not. We're probably maybe going to fail them for the course again. Well, we're going to keep an eye on that student, because that student has kind of 3 times to show that they really are interested in following on. Now, I actually don't really like this, particularly the first offense. Does anyone see maybe a problem with the first offense? So in terms of having it as part of our university policy. You know, you do it once, you get 0 for the assignment. Okay, yes.
Deal with this.
Yes, I can see it both ways. I mean, there's a way in which the 0 for the assignment might not be strict enough. A student could still do very well in the class, even with 0 on the assignment. On the other hand, from a learning perspective, you know, maybe they're going to learn from this and never plagiarize again, and then maybe we want to work with the student that they don't get such a harsh punishment.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's a great point. Anyone else see any possible problems?
Depends so much on the value of the assignment.
Right.
Like in the percentage that assignment is to the course, right? And that's what I run into. If it's a thing that's a 10-point assignment that has very little bearing on your overall grade of the course, that's not nearly enough of a punishment for them to learn. But then I've had the one experience that paper that's 20% of your grade, and if I really give that student a 0, their grade in the class is now the best they can be, probably.
Yeah.
You know, depending how else they've done on other things.
Yeah, so that's another reason. So those are great points. So the value of assignments varies greatly. Like a little tiny homework thing, you get a 0 and that's no big deal. You learn your lesson, you move on. It's not going to hurt your grade. 25% of the final grade. Oh my gosh, you get a 0 and that's going to kill you, right? Now I would say because I'm trying to I'm sort of help you prevent this from happening. It is possible, right? To say like, okay, your professor's kind of, you know, be very strict about it, and they're going to impose, but it's still okay to go to that professor and say, I realize I got a 0 on this assignment. Is it possible that I could make it up, either do another assignment or redo the assignment, or at least some credit, right? Now, I wouldn't worry about that on a tiny little homework assignment, but if it's a big paper, it's at least worth it to ask your professor, can I make this up in some way, even if I don't get full credit?
And I think a lot of professors, are willing to work with you again. They said, you're still on the books, you still have your first offense, but you're not going to get killed in the course. Does that make sense? So that's what I'm trying. Okay, so there is an appeals process. So let's say, the professor submits the work to the dean. The dean says, I'm going to charge you. And then you think the dean is crazy, right? You think the dean is just like obsessed with plagiarism and no longer is able to sleep because of it, and therefore is not thinking properly. So you can appeal. You can appeal any one of the charges. It goes to the associate provost. On main campus, that's Dr. David McCarthy, and that's within 4 weeks of the charge. And it has to be in writing. But you can just send an email to him. That's fine. You can also go see him and talk to him. You can also go see me, kind of if you learn that the professor has to do. I'm always happy to meet with people and hear their side of this. Now, the associate provost is going to look at all the evidence, going to look what the dean said, going to look at what you said, maybe if the papers are available, which they usually are, going to take a look at it, and then you're going to determine if a full appeals board should be. If the associate provost says, no, this is a slam dunk, like 3/4 of this paper comes directly from the course hero, he's probably going to say, no, we're not going to form an appeal board because it's a slam dunk. If it's in a gray area, or he's not really sure, or if he thinks the appeal has a lot of merit, then the full appeals board will be convened, and students would also be sitting on this. So you have a student point of view. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, not that many appeals get that far, because usually professors are worried about the paper. They're usually pretty good at it. But anyway, that's how the process works. So I want to add, we'll have questions, of course, but I want to add on like a personal appeal, right? Most professors are like me, right? They take it really personally, right? They are really hurt when this happens, and they blame themselves, and they kind of feel like, hey, this always happens in education, right? You're in with your team, you're working together, you're working hard. I know in first year symposium, you're having your office conferences and you're getting feedback, and then all of a sudden, 3/4 of the paper comes from the soccer team, right? It's like, oh God, I feel terrible, right? So, please remember, I understand there are mistakes, and I understand people can do it intentionally, but please recognize, Professor Seitz over here, like the student she works with has to talk to her, it's so discouraging. Right? So kind of keep that in mind. We're members of a community, and we're here to help, and we want everyone to do well, and this kind of gets in the way. So twice. Anyway, does anyone have any questions? Any additional? We've had great questions all along. But anyone here now that we come to the end, if they have any questions? Yes, David.
So I teach a symposium section, and so certainly if my students are having questions about plagiarism, I would, I can speak with them. I have to speak with students from learning or speak at learning services.
Right.
Do you think, do you think the Writing Center has the resources on this, or is the Writing Center more about formulating your paper and less about avoiding plagiarism?
Yeah, I think the Writing Center is more about formulating those ideas. So they're not necessarily in the position to check. Now the only way, but I would encourage this, if you are, I did look at theater there, I took some notes down, I'm not really sure, what was what, you could, when you make a Writing Center appointment, say, hey, this is kind of how I did it. Do you think I may have some problems with it? Right? Or was this okay that I did it that way? So then I think they would try to help you, and they might be able to, to do a little looking at the paper from that point of view, and then they might be able to help, kind of move you in a positive direction. So, but I think in general, that's not the first thing they're going to worry about. Yes.
I mean, you said I'm grammar, but I have also I like grammar. Bad grammar.
I didn't catch the very first part of it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So usually like
No, not at all, yeah. Turnitin is really just a matching, it's just a big matching engine. Now, you know, you bring up something that's kind of interesting, also sad, but so I've had students who use Grammarly, right? And Grammarly can help you formulate, can help you with grammar and can help you kind of formulate your writing in a kind of a smooth and clear way, right? But Grammarly supposedly has also a plagiarism checker function, right? And I've had students like who kind of prove that they didn't plagiarize by Grammarly, right? So, I mean, Grammarly is great for certain things, but it's not really good at detecting plagiarism, right? Turnitin.com is much better at it, right? And anyway, if I see a paper that Turnitin.com, you know, shows it's like 30% match for Wikipedia, right? And Grammarly shows it's only a 2% match, like that's not going to help the student, right? Because all I need to do is I can just Google all that stuff that's in red on Turnitin.com and I can go right to the website, right? So, yeah, Grammarly cannot get you out of a bad situation. Grammarly might help you in other ways, but it's not going to help you.
Well, I was wondering, like I have a lot of things on and then like get highlighted for some reason or it was back there.
Yeah, Grammarly might. Grammarly might be helpful. Yeah, and Grammarly I think is probably pretty good. And Word has gotten better.
Yeah.
Word is now better. But, yeah. All right, so any other questions? Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your coming. Spread the word. Dr. Dorsey is a maniac about plagiarism. Might need some deterrence. He's giving out parking tickets this year, or student tickets, and and I just wish you the best for this semester and for all your years at Cornell. I love now students, and I think this is a great place to be. This is kind of an unpleasant part of our day. But I don't want it to be that all the time. Right? Yeah. And now you can see who's
I
going to
was gonna
win.
say, I can do the raffle if everybody's ready for the raffle, so I'll go ahead and pull that up, so I do like the random number generator. So, all right, I'm gonna do the hat first. Okay, so and you need not be present to win, so if the person's not here, I'll contact them to get the prize, but okay. So the first prize number is okay, she was our first one, so I will give Celia her hat. Okay, and then the second one is beautiful mount shirt, so we're gonna do that one. Okay, and the winner of that. Bianca Sanchez. No? Okay, are we going to contact Bianca and let her know she is in the show? I'm sorry that nobody in the room.
Yes, too bad.
But keep coming, because sometimes we'll work next month. So we'll do one again in October, and November, and that's December, right? So I'll see all of you hopefully at the session. Thank you for joining us.
Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.